Hi, y'all, and welcome to the live stream. At last, we've had a little difficulty. I am so excited about our guest, though. As you know, we've been covering the Rex Heuermann case. For years, law enforcement has tried to figure out how 11 murdered bodies were found on a stretch of isolated beach highway near Gilgo Beach in Long Island. They came to call it the Long Island serial killer or the Gilgo Beach serial killer, but nobody knew who actually committed these murders. Was it even one person? Now we have a little bit of an answer as far as what law enforcement thinks. They have accused Rex Heuermann, Manhattan architect, they've accused him of murdering at least 3 of the people. And they've also accused him of, they've said they suspect him of a 4th murder. So what we've been talking about is Rex Heuermann, but I want to show you something, and then I'm going to introduce our guest who is waiting patiently, but I want to show you something that law enforcement said at the time. They said, shame on us if we don't look into Las Vegas, South Carolina, even Atlantic City. We've got to make sure if anyone has any information. Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison said. He's one of the ones who helped launch the task force that led to Heuermann's arrest. So we are very fortunate tonight to have a very special guest. We have Travis Jenkins in the studio with us. He is the general manager and editor of the News and Reporter in Chester, South Carolina. He was Journalist of the Year in 2018 by the South Carolina Press Association, and he's also a 3-time winner in the weekly division of the first place Montgomery Shore Freedom of Information Awards. I hope he's still with us, since I can see we just lost his picture. If you read social media, you will see how well respected Travis is, because over and over you see people comment about how he is unafraid to break stories about corruption, even locally in a small community. So, and for our purposes tonight, it's important because Travis was the first person to get the South Carolina search warrant that law enforcement executed. It was a huge break for the public because the New York search warrant was not made public. And this was important information about what they were looking for. So Travis, I want to say welcome. We are very glad to have you on the channel tonight.
Hey, thank you. Great to be here.
Great. Well, if you would, everybody, hit the like button as you're coming in to the live stream. And next week, we're going to be covering, we're probably going to be having John Ray on in the next week. He represents 2 of the victims, not included yet in the people Rex Heuermann is accused of murdering. He believes there's a conspiracy and that it involves a woman. We're going to be talking about that. We're also going to be analyzing Brian Kohberger's new alibi. So hit the subscribe button. You don't want to miss any of that. And I want you to know I am going to ask Travis about what's being said in South Carolina near him about other potential victims in the area. So we're going to ask that. So stick around for all of that. But Travis, let's go ahead and get started with the search warrant. Now, within hours of the time that they took Rex Heuermann into the station, they were in South Carolina. How did you first hear that they were coming into South Carolina?
To be honest with you, it took a few days, because my first impulse when someone is arrested in New York isn't to check and see if they own property in Chester, South Carolina. But a local lawyer called me, I guess maybe a day or 2 after the arrest, and said, "Hey, have you seen the stuff about this Heuermann guy in New York?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, he owns property here," which I wasn't aware of, and I pulled the mortgage and deed information.
You temporarily, you're frozen.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a 20 to 23 total acres if you add it all up. And then, we heard word that there was a lot of law enforcement activity, and that we could, we weren't even told what was there, just that there was something related to it we would be interested in, and it turned out to be the search warrant.
Okay. How did you get the search warrant?
Did want a Freedom of Information request filed, a formal one for the records. So we got that, but then we kind of went and plopped it on somebody's desk, ran over to the courthouse.
Oh, let me ask you about this. Let's go ahead and look at the search warrant that you were able to
and
get.
got it and brought it back.
Okay. So, because the search warrant in New York was not, I guess it was sealed. It wasn't public, but I think this was our first chance to see that there was what they were actually looking for. I think it's probably a copied over version of what they had requested in New York. Do you have any knowledge about that?
I lost you for a second. Knowledge about
what was asked for in New York? I think it's probably the same.
Probably so. It's probably very
right. So it's signed by somebody named Bowers, local Brad Bowers from Chester,
similar.
South Carolina.
Because I've just haven't seen. I'm sure you have as well. A lot of the things that are mentioned in there are kind of boilerplate, shoot the cubby kind of stuff. Just when you go into 20 some odd rural acres, you don't know exactly what you're going to encounter.
Travis, we're having so
they
much
just kind of put everything they might run into. A lot of it's pretty, you would see in a lot of search warrants. There were some oddly specific things, like a particular brand of bounty paper towels, which got a lot of attention that was on there.
Do you have any sense of what that was about, the bounty paper towels?
A lot of it would be on all your bases. It's a blanket. Let's put everything we can think of so that we will have.
So when you saw the search warrant that says there was Brad Bowers as the person, it also mentions our state, local, and federal partners and mentions specifically the FBI. Do you know who exactly executed?
I'm not sure who executed. It was signed by an FBI agent. The official request to the judge to approve the search. I know it was carried out by the Chester County Sheriff's Office, SLED, the State Law Enforcement Division, which is sort of our state FBI, and then the actual Federal Bureau of Investigations.
So let's talk a little bit about.
They all descended on the property.
Right. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Craig Heuermann, who lives there in Chester, South Carolina. How long has he lived in that area?
The deed and mortgage information we had said 2021, but the indication has been given to me it was actually a couple of years before that, at least.
Are you talking about Rex
I don't know
or Craig?
The specific date that he moved out here. Craig.
Are you? Oh, Craig. Craig had only been there a couple of years, maybe 4 years. You're saying?
Well, that's the mortgage information that we were able to obtain, and the deeds said 2021, but then I double checked with somebody right before I came on, and the indication was given to me it was actually at least a few years before that.
Okay. So Rex,
but I'm not sure of the exact year there.
Okay. Rex was an architect. Is there any knowledge about what Craig did? Did he work there in the community?
I'm not sure of his specific profession. Now, I've talked to some people, and I've not met him or talked to him myself, but I've talked to some people who did at least have some interaction with him. They gave me the indication that he would periodically go back to New York to work on maybe the financial books for his brother.
Okay. So it may have been a financial accounting kind of job, perhaps. Was there any information in the community about the relationship between Rex and Craig? Were they close?
I was given the indication that they were. He again, the one or two people I talked to who've had direct interaction.
So let me ask about some of the connections. Like I'm curious what people locally thought of Craig to the extent they knew him. If he hadn't been there that long, they may not have known him really well. But there was, for example, this quote from the New York Post from a neighbor who was saying, "I called the police because I was going to shoot him, but my wife talked me out of it. We called the police, and when we talked to Craig, he said, well, I told him not to cut grass on Sunday." And the statement had been that he had hit this, Craig Heuermann had hit the neighbor over the head with a steel pole, according to the neighbor. So, and that he left business cards reading, "I'm an a-hole," in mailboxes along his street. What have you heard from people, from neighbors and from people who had met Craig? Didn't mean that. They meant they said the younger brother of Rex had actually been imprisoned for something like 2 years after having killed a New York police captain. It was in a crash. He was convicted of, or pled guilty, I think, to DUI. And according to the judge at the time, the judge said he had been coked up during this accident. So I don't know if you're able to hear me or respond, but if you can, Travis, was this something that was known in the community, this prior conviction that the brother had, or was he outed basically by what's happening with his brother?
I don't think that was common knowledge at all in any past incidents. Those were not known. But what's known is the interaction he's had with people, which you mentioned some of them, putting the business cards that say "I'm an a-hole" on them in people's mailboxes, and the possible assault of the one neighbor. And then I talked to the person in whom he confided that he went back to New York periodically to do some financial work on his brother's books. He didn't have a terribly negative opinion of him. He said maybe it was just he found him a little odd, but they'd interacted several times, and I think it was mostly pleasant.
Okay. All right. That's interesting that he was going back and forth to New York, because one of the things that the search warrant told us was that law enforcement believed there may have been a conspiracy. So I know we're having a lot of technical difficulties, so I don't want to miss out on that. But let me ask you, let me go ahead and flip over to that then. What we saw in the search warrant was that there was a suggestion somebody was involved in a conspiracy with Rex Heuermann. And the suggestion was, we'll look at the exact language in a minute, but the suggestion was that it was not just for the prostitution, which was the count right before, but that it was for the murders as well. There was that implication by the fact that it was plural. Is there any suggestion that you have heard that Craig Heuermann is involved or caught up or in any way charged or believed to be part of a conspiracy with Rex?
The only thing I can kind of speak to is that the going and removing the 2002 Avalanche pickup truck that I guess supposedly Rex used to take the bodies to the beach where he dumped them. His brother was driving that truck, and that was.
And I think we've lost you, but you're probably saying that was one of the main points of the search warrant, was to get that Chevy Avalanche that supposedly Craig Heuermann had. And in fact, it was carried off as part of the search in South Carolina. Is that true? You were frozen, so I'm
yes.
filling in. Okay. Okay. Now, one of the things we've learned is that Craig Heuermann's home was.
Yes, we actually physically saw the truck leaving the property.
Okay. All right. Craig Heuermann's home, Craig, what is very isolated. This is a picture overhead of where I believe he lives. And it's basically a wooded area with nobody for a good distance around him. Is most of the area around Chester like the,
and I apologize. Chester has a lot of great things going.
Travis, we're having too much trouble hearing you. I'm going to move on to something you said in an article you wrote. You talked about Rex Heuermann's
and possibly a good internet.
you talked about Rex Heuermann's property holdings in Chester, because he himself purchased property about 2 years ago in Chester and supposedly planned to retire there. And you talked about how very much he bought. He didn't just buy one tract of land, he bought 4 different tracts of land totaling 23 acres. I mean, a large amount of land. Was there, in the aftermath of his arrest, is there discussion within the community about why he wanted so much isolated property to himself?
In the community, yes. People's speculation ran wild and their imaginations did a little bit. There were a lot of comparisons actually made to, I don't know if you remember a mini series called Chiefs that was actually filmed in Chester in the early 80s. But it dealt with essentially the bad guy was named Foxy Funderburk, played by Keith Carradine, who would kidnap hitchhikers, sexually molest them, kill them, and bury them on his property. And the last shot in that movie, you see like an aerial shot of them digging up like dozens of graves. I've been assured by a lot of people who are very close to the situation and would know that it's not going to be anything close to that. To get the truck and maybe a few other items, and they don't really think there are going to be local victims found. And I don't think I think people, when they heard what he was accused of doing in New York, I mean, it's understandable that your mind goes to the worst case scenario. But the assurance I've been given by people whose opinion I trust, and people who have pretty direct knowledge of it, is that it's not going to be anything like that here. Thankfully.
Right. Within the community, is there concern about specific people who are missing who might fit the profile? Young women, perhaps sex workers, drug addicts, people who might have been similar to the victims found along Gilgo Beach?
There is one family. They're actually from Kentucky. There was a young lady who's, I think she was 31 at the time. Her charred remains were found on Lizzie Melton Road out in the Richburg community near Interstate 77. She was from Kentucky. I think her name was Melissa Whittis, as I recall. She was last seen in September of 2019 in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Took over a month to even identify her remains because they were burned and left in a ditch.
Wow.
And that family has, I don't know if they've reached out to law enforcement, they've reached out to some local media, hoping, I think, to spark an investigation if there's a possible link between the two. But from my understanding, there's not a link between Heuermann and that Whittis case.
Okay. When did it occur? Is it a recent event or is this older? Does it predate Rex Heuermann coming? So I think what we're going to do.
It predates the information we have on the purchase of most.
Okay. All right. So I think what we're going to do is this. We're having, as everybody can hear, we're having a lot of trouble hearing Travis, and he has such great information to tell us that I really hate for us to miss that. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and I'm going to tell Travis thank you and that I appreciate him coming. I'm going to finish with some information that I want us to cover related to the South Carolina warrant. And then I'm going to either do one of two things, either interview Travis separately, and then I'll just come on and tell you what he said, or I will talk about, we'll try to figure out a way he can go to a place with a little bit better internet speed, and maybe we can have him on full time. So I just want to say thank you, Travis, very much. We appreciate the information, and I will finish up with you, and I appreciate your coming. to the phone. So what I was talking about is what they've been looking for. And they're looking for trophies. That's the number one thing. They said that included, and you can see it here, that included telephones, articles of clothing, jewelry, identification, notebooks, ledgers, Bibles. Thought, well, that's very weird. Personal effects and or photographs or recordings depicting the victims. So they're looking for anything that would give them a roadmap into other people who might have been victims. Then the next thing they were looking for was forensic or trace evidence, including but not limited to DNA. And they included things like hair, fur, anything related to, so you can hear me. Okay, good. So that included all sorts of things that would be related to being able to trace and find anything connected to the actual victims and being able to identify them. But it also included, and this was very disturbing, animal cages, crates, litters, and playpens. So some of the more disturbing parts looked for that, and that was specifically mentioned in South Carolina, but it wasn't clear whether they were actually going to go into Craig Heuermann's property. It didn't appear that they were, and it did not appear there was any structure built on the properties that Rex Heuermann had bought. It was just land, so to be built out if they retired there, but nothing built on it yet. Then there were electronic devices, including cameras, books, magazines, etc. Again, anything that would fit in with the serial killer who might have recorded what he did. Now, it seems unlikely he would keep that at his house or his brother's house. They did go to storage units, and that might have been a better bet for that. Then there were records or anything related to basically an obsession with serial killers. Now, law enforcement has said that Rex Heuermann was intensely following their investigation. That's one of the reasons they picked him up when they did, is because they were concerned that that he was actually figuring out where they were going and that he might run or hide or conceal evidence. Several people who knew him in New York have mentioned that he told them things about the Gilgo Beach serial killings, that he was following it and knew a lot about what had happened. So one of the things I wanted to ask Rex Heuermann, wanted to ask Travis, was whether he had asked anybody in South Carolina, made any comments like that. Law enforcement was also looking for ownership of the items that they were finding, and a lot of that probably has to do with getting it admitted into court. And they were looking for hunting paraphernalia, including burlap, camouflage burlap fabric, jute-like fabric, and then they were looking for things like tapes, duct tape, white or clear duct tape, and a lot of that has to do with the bodies and the way they found the bodies. The bodies of the three people that he is actually accused of having murdered, those three people were found wrapped in camouflage burlap. So that's why they're looking for that. There was also something you'll see in G about trophy instrumentalities. There was a very weird situation where they had a belt that had two letters on it, HW, or you could turn it upside down, and it was not totally clear what the letters were, and none of the victims had those initials. But the suggestion was maybe he was carving initials into leather belts. That's the only thing I could figure from what they said. So we don't have any explanation of that. And the bounty paper towels that Travis mentioned, very, very odd. How on earth could that be? Could they truly have been hoping to find bounty paper towels from 2010? Amazing. I don't know what, it must have been incredibly important for them to actually put that on there and be looking for that. As far as firearms, I don't believe they took any firearms from the South Carolina search. I'll ask Travis when I talk to him separately. But Rex was a collector, and they took 279 guns from his home. Now, 92 of those had permits. That doesn't mean the others were there illegally, because of the fact that those particular firearms some of them wouldn't have needed a permit. And so that it was unclear whether some were unpermitted or simply didn't require a permit. Then they also asked for, and let me flip back over to I want to keep this tracking with you so you can see what they're asking for. Sorry. So they also asked about locked, and this was pretty creepy, but they asked for things related to locked and unlocked containers, locked rooms, storage areas, which would not really have applied, of course, to a vehicle. But that's part of what made me think that this was copied over from the New York warrant, because a car is not going to have anything like that. Then there was just a catch-all saying anything else that would be important or that they would be looking for. So all of those were things that they were looking for as part of the search warrant. Now, the question in the forefront of everyone's minds, I think, is are there more victims? And what we heard from Travis was there is a family that thinks that potentially, they've been contacting media, that they think potentially their loved one, their daughter, might have been connected. But thus far, it doesn't appear that law enforcement in the region thinks that there's a connection. And right now, they're not seeing other victims from South Carolina who might have been connected to, killed in the same way as the 3 women Rex Heuermann is presently charged with killing. So I want to thank Travis for coming on. It's a shame we weren't able to hear more of what he had to say, but I will, don't worry, I'll interview him. I'll get that on for you. And don't forget, I'm also going to be doing the alibi of Brian Koberger next. So be sure to hit the subscribe button, and I will see y'all in the next video.